All right, just scrolling through. I need to see like faces. That way, I don't feel like I'm like talking to. So let me see where I see the most faces. Okay, page two has the most faces. So, all right, do I need to see my face? I don't, so I don't look stupid. Maybe so. All right. So anyway, I'll just tell y'all why I wanted to do this, and then we'll kind of move from there. So I have a lot of baby writers. I try not to say aspiring writers. I feel like if you write and if you have a script, you are a writer. So um, and so I was fielding a lot of questions about people, especially because a lot of the rules had been changing um, in all the programs. So with people kind of at home, and I know there's a little bit of anxiety with what's going on right now and trying to write. So I just wanted to sort of sit down and kind of tell you guys about my experience. I know, some of you may not. In doing the fellowships, I'll invite a couple of people. Karen Horn, who was over Writers on the Verge when I was in Writers on the Verge, she'll be stopping in. Latoya Morgan, who went to the WB program and who's now running Walking Dead, she is super great. And Julian Kiani, who was in the program in Writers on the Verge in 2014 when I was in the program. And so they'll come in and talk experiences and field questions. We'll try to handle it kind of like a panel. So I don't just a little tiny bit about me. I'm a drama writer. I pretty much only write drama. I stay in the drama or dramedy space. I've written on American Crime, 13 Reasons Why, Runaways, Looking for Alaska, and I just finished working on Jack Ryan. So I'm currently that's why I was a supervising producer, and so I've been able to sort of work my way up. But I started in Writers on the Verge in 2014. So I had a lot of people ask questions on Twitter. So a lot of those I will sort of look at and kind of feel through those, and just kind of as I go through. And so I will start off by saying, because I saw this was one of the questions, no, you're not too old. Um, and also you can have, and also you don't have to have a ton of experience. Your experience is your script. Your experience are the people that you meet. Your experience. I mean, not everybody's able to get those assistant jobs. They're really, really tough. I was not able to get an assistant job when I got in Writers on the Verge. I was working at a psychic company. So I went to I applied while I was at the psychic company. I worked graveyard shift, so it allowed me time to write at night, and then I was able to get into the programs. And I'll rewind back. So I applied to the programs 3 years in a row. My first year, I wrote a spec of Southland. My second year, I wrote a spec of Shameless. And then my third year, I wrote a spec for Orange is the New Black. And so all of those are sort of different in a way. I do enjoy writing dramedy. So I wanted to be able to sort of show like that I could do both in a way as a drama writer. So, my first year, I was a finalist. And basically, you have to you have to go to these sites. So I know this is super duper far away, but I'll talk about it in a second. But basically, like these are the major programs, and I do have one that's left off. So that's NBC Writers on the Verge, CBS TV Mentoring Program, the Warner Brothers TV Writers Fellowship, and the Walt Disney Television Writing Program. So, they all have different things, different guidelines, different scripts that they accept. And so you do want to make sure that you really do follow the rules, because you make a mistake, you're going to get thrown out. So you want to make sure that you really follow those rules for each one. So my first year, I was really late getting into the game. So I sort of had missed the deadline for a lot of programs, and I didn't have a recommendation because ABC required a recommendation. So I called one of my friends who was a finalist the year before, Benjamin Jones, and I was like, so what do I need to do to get into the program? So he was like, you need to have a spec, and you probably should have a pilot. So I wanted to spec a specific show because I enjoyed it. I was told not to spec that show, and we'll get into that in a second about what to spec and what not to or whatnot. But I was told not to, and my father is a police officer, so Ben suggested that because I watched Southland, that I should probably do a Southland spec. It would be sort of in line with my story. I know a lot about police. I can call my dad anytime if I need informations. And also I really like the show. And that's one thing about specting something. You really do want to spec something that you actually like. Like you want to spec a show that you enjoy watching so that you can sort of pour that sort of joy into the script. So I only submitted to one program that year, and that was Writers on the Verge. I did was a finalist that year, luckily enough. And the process is basically, you write your script, you have to send in your packet with your essays, with your essays, your script, your resume, all those things. You send that off, and then you wait for weeks, and you probably should do your best to forget about it so you're not like going driving yourself crazy. So, you send that thing off, and then you wait a couple of weeks, months, whatever later, you'll get a call. They will then say, hey, you are in the semifinals or whatever. And then you usually have a phone interview where you will then talk to that person on the phone. And that phone interview is more of it's very like TV knowledge. And in my experience, at least, it's like, it's about your TV knowledge. Like, why do you write? What are the shows that you really enjoy? It's about your work, and it's about your knowledge of television. Then you make it to the personal interview. This is where I failed. So in the personal interview, I sucked. I was very nervous. I did not want to talk about stuff. I really didn't know how to talk about certain things about my life. And so it was very difficult for me. And I think that Karen was able to see that. And so I didn't get in. And I remember walking out of the the thing, and I was like, I didn't get in. I called my mom. I was like, I don't think I got in. It was terrible. And a lot of that had to just do with um me just not necessarily being authentically who I was. And that's a lot that I want to sort of focus on. Like, people say, like, what makes, a good candidate for the program, what makes a good spec and whatnot. And I would say, like, your voice, and that is super generic or whatnot, but like your voice is important. Who you are, where you come from, like what you enjoy, what you read, like those type of things really inform who you are, your life experiences. And for me, I didn't want to talk about my life experiences. And if you want to be a TV writer, you need to get used to it. Like, you're going to be talking about your life experiences. And so I was not able to get past that. So I didn't get in. I applied the next year, and I was a finalist again, this time at the ABC program. And ABC is a little bit different. When the ABC program, you go through it, you have to have a recommendation. So you typically have to get a recommendation from an executive or someone who, or a producer who has read your work. So then you do the ABC thing, and ABC is more of a trial. They kind of, you do sort of like a speed round where you meet these executives, and you have to pitch yourself and pitch, yourself as a writer, which now is, and we'll talk about that, is a part of the application process, is that you have to pitch yourself for a specific show. And so we'll go, more in depth into that. And so they have that, and then you have this sort of meet and greet where it's all these executives and you with the finalists, and you guys are kind of talking. It was really weird for me. I felt very awkward, and a lot of the and part of that was insecurity because a lot of the finalists were like script coordinators and script supervisors and assistants, and I was like, I work at a psychic company, and so I was super embarrassed. I didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't realize that like that actual job would actually make me stand out, and we'll get to that in a second. And so the next year I was not planning on going into the programs. I was like, I'm not doing this again. I'm over it. I'm gonna write a feature or a pilot. And I had attitude about it. I was like, I made it to the finals 2 years in a row, and it sucked, and I didn't get picked. So I was in my feelings, and I didn't want to submit. So super random. The owner of the company that I worked at the psychic company, he had he took my department out to lunch. I worked in psychic management. So he took us out to lunch, and he was like, "Hey, I heard you almost got hired by Disney." And I was like, no, not really." And I explained the way the program works. And he had gone to USC Film School. So he was like, "You really should try again. You really should whatever, whatever." So I was like, yeah, okay. And so at the time, all the psychics were like calling in, complaining because I had to like communicate directly with them in my department. And they were calling and complaining about the blood moon and about all of this stuff. So I went and looked it up because typically it's like them like making up stuff as a reason why they logged in late. So I went to look it up, and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. So I was in a writers group at the time, and I want to say this had to be like late April, early May, somewhere around there. I was like, well, maybe I will, do write a spec. And so you guys know the deadlines are typically like late May, so I didn't have a lot of time. So my writers group had already started. So I was like, all right, let me jump in here and let me try to get this thing going. And so I quickly tried to write the script. I workshopped it with my writers group as fast as I could. I'm not the best proofreader on earth, so I had to pay for somebody to. I had to pay a copy editor to get the thing proofread, and I got it in literally the day it was due. Don't do that. Like, it's not saying that it's good or bad, but I would not stress myself out like that. You want to get your stuff done as soon as you possibly can. Needless to say, I did get in that year, but I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that in the interview, I was just much more open. I was much more myself. And I was just able to be more comfortable and talk about my life, talk about my sexuality, things that normally I wouldn't talk about to strangers. And that was my main thing. Like, I don't want to say this to no strangers. Like, I don't know her, but like, that's what happens when you get in the room. It's going to be, 7 to 12, 13 people, and those people are going to be strangers, and you're going to be sharing your stories with them in hopes of making the overall story better. So, like, you have to get used to that. I tell people who I talk to all the time, like, you really have to get used to talking about yourself intimately and your experiences intimately and being okay with that. Because if you are not, you will definitely struggle, especially in an interview process, because they not you're in the finals. Like, they clearly think your writing is good. So now they want to see who you are. What what about you informs your writing? When I talked about working at a psychic company, like, they were like, "Oh, really? You are psychic?" And then like I was like, "No, well, I worked in psychic management." They're like, "What? Psychic management?" And so like I realized that that was a story that I could actually tell, because like, how many TV writers can say they worked at a psychic company? Not many. And so that those type of things that I was sort of embarrassed about, those things helped me out throughout the process. And also, I thought I was too old. I was like, oh, I'm like 34, like, oh, I'm not that. That's no. Like, there were people in the program who were older than me. There were people in the program who are younger than me, a good script is a good script. And so, and typically just know that like your age and your experience and your life experience is a plus. So like you've gone through probably more than somebody who's 27. So you have more to offer, you have more life experience, you have other things to share. And so don't be afraid to share those, because those are going to be the things that help you, you know, stand out when you are going through the process. So like I said before, there are like there are these programs. So there's NBC Riders on the Verge, there's the CBS Mentoring Program, there is Warner Brothers, and there is Walt Disney, the Walt Disney Television Writing Program. So if you see these deadlines for, I know Writers on the Verge recently changed theirs, so the deadline is May 10th, which is like right around the corner, and you need 2 pilots. And so when you need 2 pilots, those pilots need to be either comedy or they need to be either drama. Like you can't give them 1/2 hour and one drama and be like, "But I'm a dramedy writer." Like I want to show them both. You're gonna get hired on one or the other. So you need to show strength in one or the other. And so again, you know, 2 pilots is different from what they've asked for in the past. When I had to do it, we had to turn in a spec. So, but I always say like this, I mean, if you are writing every year, or if you're writing a pilot every year, you probably should have two, even if it's one that's not that great, but you got 3 weeks or so to dust that thing off and polish it up and let people read it and get it in line so that you can have this stuff taken care of. So that is, you know, Writers on the Verge. And we'll get into sort of like the specifics of all the pilots and specs in a second. CBS Mentoring Program, the date is the submissions open March 1st. It closes May 31st. Now with CBS, they have, you also have to have 2 samples, but they accept original pilots. They also accept stage plays, and they accept short fiction stories. So, like, you can actually get into the CBS program by not just submitting a pilot. There are other things that you can actually submit to get you in the program. I can't say which one is better or which one will get you more clout or whatever, but like, again, if you can show that you can write a pilot and you have a really strong play, that just shows, and one a play will show that you're really strong in dialogue sometimes. And so that's something. So if you do have something like that, don't be afraid to submit it. So they accept 3 forms in their application process. Then Warner Brothers, their deadline is May 31st, and they do spec scripts. Warner Brothers is very, very strict about what they will and will not accept. Go on their website and look and see what specs they will take, because they do not take everything. And so you want to probably have us now, like a lot of these things aren't necessarily asking for specs. So, but again, just know that if you're going to write one, you definitely need to, it needs to be on the Warner Brothers Dropbox and what shows they're accepting, because otherwise there's nowhere else for you to actually use it in any of the other programs. And then there is the Walt Disney Television one. It's May 4th through June 5th. They accept original pilots. You have to do 2 original pilots there. You actually have to write a summary of your pilots, and then you have to do your staffing pitch, i.e., a show that is sort of a Disney affiliate show, where you pitch yourself and why you think that you would be a good, you know, writer for that show. And so we're gonna kind of break all those things down. So first, I'll just tell you, I'm gonna kind of go through pilots. I'll go through specs, then we'll talk about the essays. We'll talk about something I call submission fatigue, and then I kind of already talked about the interviews, but you know, we'll talk about, you know, whatever. If people have questions right now, if you want to type them on the side, I will be glad to answer them. Let me sort of look down here. There's a, oh, somebody got the list and everything. Y'all look, y'all all studious. Look at this. Okay. Well, who I'm not. I guess that's Jelena. Somebody posted that. I appreciate that. Thank y'all. You can also people did ask a question about where they can find scripts. There is a site that you can, yeah, you can if you're in LA, you can always go to the WGA and you can go to the WGA library. They have pretty much every single script that you're gonna need there at the WGA library. And there is let's see, TV pilot scripts. There is another site, and it's basically it's a Google site, and so it's just like sites.google.com, and it's like slash TV writing. But anyway, they have all of the pilots that I'll show it. I'm super like super ghetto, but whatever. But that's what it looks like. But anyway, they have a whole bunch. They'll have pilots pretty much from every season, every network. They'll have show collections there. Also, oh, WGA library is closed. That's right. All right. So then this site is actually really important. I'll probably link everybody to this site like on Twitter and on my IG, and I'll post it. But it's basically on this site, they give you, it'll literally run you down every season that every pilot has been picked up. They'll have show collections, they'll have stuff from the 90s up until present day. Like you can go and see 7 episodes from My So-Called Life on that particular website. And so that way you can sort of see what shows they have available there. Sometimes you can ask around the people who work on these specific shows, but you want to be able to, if you're going to write a spec particularly, be able to find those shows so that you can, one, emulate the format of the show. And that's the thing. We can, just get into talking about specs, because that's gonna take that won't take a whole ton of time, at least not to me. So since Warner Brothers is the one that is asking for specs, what I would say is, one, look at their Dropbox, see what they ask for. And then as far as specs go, I'm not like the expert on specs, but I will tell you the way I sort of approached what I did when I wrote my particular specs. One of the things that I did is that every show, and again, this is not for everybody clearly, but every show that I spec had at least two people of color in the cast. For me, that was very important. I typically talked about that in my interviews. I would usually ask you, well, why did you spec this show? That was one of the things that I would talk about. Like, this show actually shows a world that I live in. So I respect it. That's why I wanted to write it. And so typically the shows would have two black characters. That was one of the things. Another one, it was a show that I really, really liked, and also that was sort of respected critically, in a way. Either it's captured sort of the zeitgeist and everybody's talking about it, like Orange is the New Black, or it's something like Southland, where it's not a show that everybody probably watches, but it was a show that was respected. So, I picked shows that I felt that were challenging, but that also felt like what I was, trying to give off as a writer. So in these specs, my main thing was you want to stay within the world of the show. And so typically you can either do a procedural, which is, like Law and Order or something on CBS, or like a crime drama, or you're gonna do a more serialized show. I typically did serialized shows. They are sometimes a little tricky because you have to slot those shows. So say for example, if you wanted to do what's the show we all watching right now? That's gonna have a season 2 or 3. Just say This Is Us. All right, just say This Is Us or Atlanta. You know, so if you're gonna do those shows, you can either think about what's going to happen the next season and do it like that. That's a option, or you can slot it and say, well, I'm going to take season 2, and I like and in between episodes 13, episodes say 10 and 12, I'm gonna slot my series. So basically, what you would do is when you would write that spec, you would do a previously on page. So like in the front of the spec, like for my Orange is the New Black, it was like previously on Orange is the New Black. Piper has agreed to marry Larry immediately, but she hasn't told Alex about her decision. And I just kind of rolled through sort of, especially the characters that are going to be prevalent in my script and in my spec. I want to make sure that the previously on focuses on those characters because those are the ones that they're going to follow in the actual spec that you're going to do. And then at the bottom of the spec is like my episode. In this particular episode of Orange is the New Black was called Blood Moon, and we'll talk about that. Slots in season 1 between episodes 13 and 14. So I have to sort of make sure I knew what happened on episode 12, make sure I knew what happened in episode 13. But at the same time, you don't have to like be pulling threads from both of those. You can live in the middle and just give hints so that the reader, and the reader typically who reads your stuff will be, they'll be knowledgeable of the show that they're reading for. So they'll understand like what you're doing. So you want to make sure that you slot there and that it feels aligned with the season. So this would be episode 12.5. You know what I'm saying? Episode 12 and a half. And so that's what you would do if you want to slot. A lot of times, a lot of us are doing more serialized shows because those are the shows that are on cable. Those are typically the critically acclaimed or like, the buzzy shows. So you want to, if you're going to do that, you want to learn how to slot. No, you don't have to label it episode 12.5. You just give it a title. You would just give it whatever your title. My title was Blood Moon, and so that's what it was. You just put like my episode Blood Moon slots in season 1 between 12 and 13. And so you would do the same thing for, for any of those shows. And let me see, how do you spec a show that is running now, like Insecure? Is it dangerous to pick up? No, I mean, so on Shameless, excuse me, on Southland, Regina King's character at the end of the season got pregnant. And I had already started working on my spec. And I was like, oh no, it like super like messed me up. But you can maneuver your stories. And again, like people won't like hold you like super down. They want to just make sure you understand the series. They want to make sure you understand the flow of the show. So again, your previously on page is really important. So that way they understand where they should be gauging your show in that particular season. And then as far as like the subject matter, so I'll talk about my Orange is the New Black because there's probably, well, both my Shameless, they were both kind of out there. And so this is something that I really tell people to be like really audacious in your storytelling. Now, don't go out of bounds in what the show usually does. If the show does not have aliens, do not add aliens. Like don't do that. Do not focus your specs around supporting characters. Like you don't want to do that. So like you definitely want to focus it on your leads. So for example, in my Southland, there was the character Detective Cooper, and like he was a lead, but they would hint that this character was gay, but they never like did a storyline on it. So I wrote my spec that was a storyline surrounded about this character and his sexuality because they would sort of hint at it, but they never did it. So that was part of my spec. In Shameless and in Orange is the New Black, I kind of just was like, Shameless is kind of balls to the wall crazy. And Orange is the New Black, their humor tends to be very dark. And so I wanted to do something fun. And so this is when I say about like taking chances with your spec. And understanding like your show. So like for Shameless, the show is really about family. Like ultimately, like at its bare bones, there's a problem that happens. Lib or Fiona, somebody does something bad, probably Frank, and then the family usually has to scurry to pick up all the pieces and come back together. So like I figured that framework out. I watched tons of episodes of Shameless. I went to the WGA library. I read a bunch of scripts. I wanted to see the beats. I wanted to see the way stuff change. You want to be as specific as you can, like in um in like mimicking the show and mimicking the language of the show. So but like I wanted my actual episode to like stand out. So my episode was about how Frank was suing the estate of a dead woman because the woman was hit by a bus and one of her limbs hit him in the face. So that actually really happened. So I just went and like typed in like ridiculous like cases. And so I went and looked up the case. And luckily one of my friends was I was in a writing class and one of the people in the thing was a lawyer. So I was really able to like make sure my court stuff was very specific. But like it was ridiculous because Frank had to prove that the person committed suicide so that he could get the money. And the entire family needed the money because like they had termites. So like that was it. But like it was very out there. It was very crazy. Lip had to go sell sperm. He was underage, but he was really smart. So he had golden sperm. So I tried to like mimic so the outrageousness of Shameless. I wanted to do that. In Orange is the New Black, like I said, I wasn't gonna submit, but my again, my the owner of the company sort of pushed me towards it. And then when I started to learn about the blood moon, I started to see how it like had like stuff for like psychics and also in religion. So I was like, well, this would be cool. So then I did an Orange is the New Black. It was called Blood Moon. And basically it was about all the women had gone on a protest because they were getting shorter showers, and so they went on a dirty protest. And then during the dirty protest, there was a blood moon, and everyone got their cycle at the same time. And Piper wanted to like drop out, and Red was like, "No, nah, you're not gonna do that." And the usually Orange is the New Black would always have a supporting character, and they would do the backstory of that character. And so at the time, they hadn't done a backstory for Pusey. So I did a story about her and about her trying to learn to be more butch so she could attract more girls. So it started off with Pusey having hair and she had to cut it off because she would, and so the way you would see her in the series when it started. So that spec got me into Writers on the Verge. But I will say, I think that my interview really, 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 really helped. I was much more relaxed. I was much calmer. I had done tons of like mock interviews with friends of mine. And so um, sorry, I had done like tons of mock interviews, and so like I felt really comfortable about it. I had met Jen Grisanti, who is now running the writers program, but she had read a short that I had written called Painless, and so I met with her. And I'll just tell you that story real quick. And this is how I realized I was being fake as shit when in those other two years before. So I wrote Painless with my roommate Jamal, and so he came to the meeting with me with Jen for me to meet with Jen. So Jen gave us notes and was telling us what she liked and what she thought I could do better and whatnot. And then, excuse me, let me look at this. Um, and um, and so we were talking and all that. So after the note session was over, I walk out and my boy was like, "Who the hell was that in there?" And I was like, "That was Jen Grisanti, like the lady I told you she's like in Writers of Murray." He was like, "No, who are you?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He was like, "The way you were talking, like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am." And like, he was like, "You threw your Southern accent away. It was gone." He was like, "I don't know who that dude was." And he was like, "That's why you ain't getting these programs. Look at you. Like, you were so fake." And so like, I had to be like shamed into like being myself, basically. I'm a big personality. If you guys follow me on Twitter or whatever, I run my mouth. I like my blunts and my coffee. I like my trap music. And and I used to feel like those type of things weren't like professional. And then I didn't have a job in the industry. So it was like I didn't feel like I was like a professional, like I came off like professional, but like not everybody looking for like a stiff shirt. You know what I'm saying? Like, so in the rooms, I'm typically the one who is up on a lot of stuff in those rooms. I usually know all the young stuff. I live with a teenager, so we exchange trap music all the time, you know. And so like I just, I use and I don't want to say I'm 40 years old now, so I won't say youth, but even then, typically in rooms, like at 40, I'm still the youngest guy in the room. Just so you all know, when I got on American Crime, I was 34, I think 35, and I was the youngest person in the room at the time. So, people worry about like, oh, I'm too old. I'm from the north side. North side. Yeah, so people worry about being too old and all of that stuff, and like just be yourself. Like if you're older, Nimitz over here, Nimitz, I'm not here in Eisenhower. So if you are, you use that experience, and I want to use that in experience in talking about like diversity or whatever. Like our room in Writers on the Verge, I was the only black guy. There was a white guy. There was a guy who was half white, half, I think, Korean. We have Julian, who's going to be on in a second, who is Middle Eastern and Spanish. People always think he's Jewish, so he uses that kind of thing to his advantage. I'm sure he'll talk about that. And just like turning that into like a joke and stuff, because it's like a running joke for him. Um, and so there was a wide variety, and I want to say like diversity is not just like skin color or male or female. Diversity is like I was in the army, like I was a fighter pilot, I used to be a lawyer. um that is there's not, there are writers, there are not that many writers who are also lawyers. There are a lot of legal shows though, so you be necessary. Or if you were a teacher in your former, if you were a teacher in your previous life or whatever, what type of teacher were you? Did you teach high school? There are there are a couple of what was I gonna say? I lost my train of thought because I started reading. Somebody said, "What the f, Kurt?" Anyway, so diversity. So like you just, it's you being. What are the things about you that make you different? What are the things about you that are going to make you stand out amongst all the 1,500 people who are going to submit to this program? So you know. If you were a lawyer, if you were a doctor, a psychologist, if you worked at a psychic company, like whatever, like you want to make sure that like those things, like you can talk about those things because those things are actually really important. And so like those things, if you are what is the thing called, like if you come from like a specific type of religion or something like that, you know what I'm saying? So like all of those things matter, and like those are the type of things that you would definitely want to talk about in like your essay. And so in just talking about the essay, so you want your essay to be one personal, and then you want it to sort of show like who you are as a writer. So typically the things that I write about are like father son relationships. I do teen drama, and so a lot of that has to just do with the relationship that I have with my father. My dad was a police officer for 35 years, and I am a gay kid. There was a lot of weirdness there for me about coming out and whatnot. So like I wrote about that, but it you don't have to write about stuff in like a woe is me way, or like now granted, if your story was traumatic and you want to tell that, but like these stories don't have to be like making people cry or like like something super traumatic. You want it to be engaging. You want to show like who you are as a writer. So, my the one that I got into the program with, and I shared it with a couple of people today. But it was basically like it started off. It was like I'm sitting at home, like chilling, and me and my dad are watching the combine on the NFL Network, and then um and then it basically becomes a coming out story, and you wonder like, am I going, like, what is my dad going to say by the end of the essay? So that tells you a lot about me. I talk about my dad being a police officer. I talk about the type of stories that I want to write, and then why I want to write those stories, and then I wrap it up, and I wrap that story up in a bow and say, well, you do it like you want to be engaging. You want to take them on a journey with you. You want them to know who you are. It's that all that essay should reflect also the way that you actually write story. So, mine was serial comedic. It was in line with what I, turned in, but there was a lot of heart there. And I think that that's something that I like to put in a lot of my scripts. My Orange is the New Black, while was definitely like over the top when you have a bunch of women like running around, like looking for pads. But at the same time, it was about companionship, and it was about love, and it was about religion and what people deem religious and sacrilegious or whatnot. And so you want to be able to like show your voice in those essays and tell a little bit about yourself and make people want to know more about you. And so again, like a lot of times people will write these essays, and like, I was shot and whatever, but like, does that inform your writing? If it doesn't inform your writing, then why are you talking about it? Like, if it's not informing your writing, then don't talk about that. You want to talk about something that informs your writing. And so that story I told about, me and my father, was also about um, the stories that I want to tell, stories about Black fathers and sons. And those are the things that attract me. And those are the things that I write about personal, that I write about, for my own original stuff. And so you want to be able to give that off in your essays. Um, and let me see what else is there. I'm trying to think of any more essay questions, read format. I mean, all of that stuff, like character limit, word count. Like, listen, everybody has a different thing. Like, some's gonna be a 500 words, some's gonna be 200 words. Like, you follow what they say and don't go a word over. Like, do not. Like, don't. Like, follow instructions. Do what they ask. You might think it's nitty. Oh well, it ain't your program. So, if you don't want to do it, then don't you don't have to submit. That's one less script that they have to read. No, you don't. I should you register with the WGA? Sure, if you want to. Yeah, I mean, why not? Um, I think one I did, and one I didn't. I don't know. I know one I for sure did, but yeah, go ahead and do it anyway. Why not? Just protect your stuff just in case. Um, and a lot of money. See, somebody said that did it was $15. So if you got 15, then you can do it. Essays. I want to talk more about, again, like I said, in those essays, because I think that people tend to like overlook them and like, do them at the last minute. Do not do them at the last minute because th- they are very important. So I would say, definitely pay attention to those. Make sure they say who you are, and and all that good stuff, and you'll be fine. And I'm trying to see if Karen Horn is here yet to talk to some of y'all. Um, I don't know. I guess not. So I'll wait. But if you all have questions right now, just go ahead, and I'm looking on the side right here. Hiya, I'm waiting to get in. Okay, Karen's waiting to get in. Hold on. I'm finna yell like a fool. Gio! Okay.
Kurt, I'm here. Hey,
There we go.
there we
Karen.
go. Hi.
Can y'all hear Karen? Just like say yes. Yes. All right. So Karen was the head of Writers on the Verge and pretty much all things diversity and inclusion at NBC for Karen. I'm not going to say how many years. You can say how many years.